God's done in your life.
Well, my goodness, I didn't know we had so many people. I sit down here in front and I never know who's back there. And I think my testimony will be a little bit different to most people because I want to mention some people in my life that has been a great influence in my life. And I want to tell you a little bit about my husband. I had a husband for 58 years, but he never came to church with me one time, not once. But he was saved.
Amen. Right.
So the person that was the most influence in my life was my mother. I had a wonderful Christian mother. And she taught me many, many lessons when I was very young. And she was a prayer warrior. We had a sack of beans behind our kitchen door, and that was her prayer closet. And if I came into the house when I couldn't find her, I knew she was praying behind the door. And she taught me a wonderful lesson in prayer, how the Lord answers prayer. I think I must have been, I should have kept better records. I think I was about 8 or 9 years old. And both my mother and dad were sick. And they had pneumonia. And I would see the doctor come and go. And in his little Model T Ford. And we all got run out of the house when the doctor was coming. So when he left, I went running into the house to find out how my dad was and how my mama was. And my sister put her arms around me and she started to cry. And I knew that something was wrong. She said, he said that we might lose both of them before morning. So I went out the door. I had a heavy load on my shoulders. And I went out the door, through the barnyard, down, and we had a pine thicket behind the barn. And that's where my playhouse was. And I fell on that bed of pine needles, and I prayed, and I cried, and I asked the Lord to not let my mom and dad die. And I even promised him that if he would save my parents, I would serve him, I would love him and serve him all of my life. And I don't remember a time in that age when I asked the Lord to forgive my sins. But I lived like that. I made that promise to him, and I was a good little girl. I was, and I did the right thing. I wouldn't do anything that would hurt my mother or my father or the Lord. So I lived I don't know what would have happened to me if I'd have died. But I was a good person. I was a believer. But I don't think I was a Christian because I could never remember a time when I asked the Lord to forgive me of my sins. I didn't think I had any sins. So we went to church every day. We had a pastor came out from Hot Springs. We was in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And he came out from Hot Springs. Brother Small, I'll remember him as long as I live, wonderful man. And preached for us in the morning, but in the evening, we had no services. We had a young people's group called BYPU or something, and I was president of that group. And I just went on living like I had always been until I got older. And then there was a young man came into the community. He was working for a farmer in our community. And that was not my husband at that time, but he became my husband. He was farming for a fellow there in the community, raising watermelons. I loved him, and I loved his watermelons. So we got married in 1935, and we got married in the morning, and that same day we went to Louisiana because he had a promise of a good job in the oil fields. and lived all over Louisiana. My first home was a houseboat on Bayou Lafourche. That was fun. Anyway, then we moved in a nice little house up in town, right in front of the Baptist church. And I thought, how exciting. I can just sit here on the porch and hear them sing. Because in the summertime, the doors were all open and you could hear everything. So I did. I sit there for about 3 nights and listened to them sing, but I wanted to hear that preacher preach. So I went to church, and that was the night I was saved. I was really saved. And I was baptized in Grand Isle. Maybe you've heard, during this last storm, I'm sure you heard a lot about the torture and all they were going through with in Louisiana. And Grand Isle was right on the edge of the Gulf of Mexico. And that's where I was baptized. And that's when I started praying for my husband. I had 2 little boys, and they loved church. They would go to, I had never heard anything about a nursery. They never stayed in the nursery. They would sit on the seat by me, good little boys, and always wanted to go to church. So I saw that they got to go to church. We lived in New Orleans, in the oil field. They transferred him quite often, and we lived in Slidell. But then we moved to Baton Rouge, and I was so happy in Baton Rouge that I found a nice little Baptist church, and I had a big Sunday school class, and I was just so happy. But he wanted to quit his job in the oil fields and move to shipyard. This was during the World War II. He wanted to move to the shipyard and go to work, so I went right along with him. So, and then when the work was over in the shipyard, we moved back to Yuba City. His brother, he was from a family of 10, and his brother had a store right here on the end of Plymouth Street, and he wanted us to come and help him in the store, so we did that. And my children found that little church up by Ulrich's, Baptist church up by Ulrich's. And they never missed. The Nylands, you wouldn't know them, but I'm sure Shirley and Brian know them. They would pick them up every Sunday and take them to church. And my daughter was about 7 years old. She went with them sometime, but she didn't go regularly. And I kept saying, I want to join the church. I want to get into the church. I have to get me some new clothes. I want to go to church. But my husband always said, you don't have to go to church to be a Christian. You can be a Christian and not go to church at all. So I just kept putting it off, and I kept putting it off. Time went by, and we got older. My children grew up, and by this time, my oldest son was 17 years old. And that's when he got killed. Suddenly, 17 years old. That was about the hardest thing I think that I ever had to go through. And it made my husband bitter. He was bitter. And my son, who was a Christian, even got bitter. But I wasn't never bitter. I loved the Lord, and I wasn't bitter, but I just wanted to know why. Why? Maybe someday I'll know why. So, let's see what happened after that. Oh, Pat was baptized right here in this. You was wondering if there was anybody here that was, she was baptized in the baptistry. The baptistry was finished, but there was paint cans all over the floor, and I think that they were just finishing up with the painting. And so anyway, after my son got killed, I just knew that I had to get closer to the Lord. I had to, or I couldn't live. So I joined the church in 1953, and that was when my son was killed in 1953. And I came to church. He was killed on Thursday. I came to church on Sunday, and I came forth and rededicated my life. So we didn't have this many people at that time, not enough workers. So I was kitchen advisor, I was president of our women's group, I was church clerk, and I wanted to help the pastor when he was covering these seats. He had several seats that was pretty well gone, and he wanted to redo the seats. And Bernice and I helped him. Well, he let us pull tax. That's about all we could do. But when I'd say I'm going to go up to the church for about a couple of hours, my husband would say, "Oh, why don't you just take your suitcase and stay up there? You just may as well live up there." But and then he was getting sick about that time with Alzheimer's, and he had emphysema, and then he even had a little stroke. And I wondered if I was doing the wrong thing by leaving him and coming to church. So I began to pray and ask the Lord to help me understand if I was doing the wrong thing. So he let me know. He said, "You promised to love and serve me all the days of your life." So that settled that question. But then he kept getting worse and worse, sick and sicker, and I knew that he was under conviction, and he kept calling and wanting me to come and talk to him. He'd wake me up at 4 o'clock in the morning, come in the kitchen and talk to him. But he would get right to the point, and then he would turn away. But then one morning he called me to come into his room. He wanted to talk to me. So I went in there, and he said, "There's a light in my room, and I can't get rid of it." And I said, "Well, I want to ask you one more question, one more time. Have you ever asked the Lord to forgive you your sins? Have you ever asked him to save you?" "No," he said, "but I'm ready if you'll help me." So we prayed the sinner's prayer, and I know that he was saved. I never have doubted 1 minute. I know that he was saved. But it took a long time. It took a long time. It wasn't easy. I can tell you it wasn't easy. But I had this one scripture that I memorized when I was just a small child. I think it's Psalms 21, 1 and 2. "I would lift up mine eyes into the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth." And I think that saved me, and all the good people in the church. There was seniors here that it's been gone a long time, that were really wonderful people. Bernice Vinegar was my mentor. She was wonderful. And we had several of them. I wish you all could have known them. Wonderful old saints that helped me through this time. So there is just one thing I said all this in order to say this. If you're praying for somebody, and you've maybe been praying for them a long time, and the Lord hasn't answered, don't ever give up. Right. Don't ever give up. Right. There was a time, Pastor just mentioned this, I had thought of when we were having a little conflict in the church. People were leaving, and my friends, and I wanted to go too. I wanted to go, but the Lord kept telling me, "No, you need to be here. You need to stay here." So I went to Lucerne that year to the retreat, and we had a pastor that preached a message on, he said, "The only biblical reason you have to leave a church is if you're not getting the word." And I could never have said that. Amen. Pastor Vinegar, everybody that was ever here preached the word. We get the word. Right. So that's about all I can have to say.